So Prince William has basically staged a quiet coup inside Buckingham Palace, and his first major move is to systematically remove Queen Camilla from the royal machine after a secret luxury yacht scandal completely blew up. And the wildest part isn't even the yacht, it's the fact that this whole thing unraveled because of a routine ship registry update that almost nobody reads. Like, we're talking about the kind of maritime filing that exists purely for insurance purposes, and it ended up triggering a chain reaction that's now reshaping the British monarchy in real time. That's where the story actually starts. And honestly, the deeper you go into the timeline, the more the official explanations just completely fall apart. Alright, let's break this down. The trip nobody was supposed to know about happened in late July 2025. While William and Kate were doing back-to-back public engagements across the UK, visiting a children's hospice in Birmingham, attending a veterans event near Edinburgh, Camilla was on a super yacht anchored off the southern coast of France. This wasn't a royal vessel, it wasn't chartered by the Crown with an official staff list and an entry in the court circular. It was a private superyacht registered in Malta called the Esperanza III, owned through a holding company in Luxembourg, and belonging to a Swiss-based financier whose name didn't appear anywhere in Camilla's official schedule, her public diary, or any press release issued by the palace during that entire summer. No announcement was made to the public, no royal correspondents received a briefing. Even the palace press office, which normally records nearly every major movement of senior working royals, had absolutely no record of this journey. That alone tells you a lot. This wasn't an oversight, this was deliberately kept off the books. The yacht's owner is not a convicted criminal and authorities have never charged him with any crime. But over the past 10 years, his name has appeared in multiple European lobbying disclosures. His company maintains active business interests in land development, agricultural policy, and heritage property laws, fields that are uncomfortably close to the types of decisions that royal patronages and crown estate management can influence. He's exactly the kind of individual the royal family was supposed to avoid after the Prince Andrew scandals. And here's where it gets worse. Camilla had stayed on his boat before. That detail came out later, and we'll get to it, but for now let's focus on this specific trip in late July, which lasted 5 days. The guest list featured a Conservative Party donor with active property planning applications in the West Country. It also included a European media executive whose company holds broadcasting contracts with businesses that receive royal endorsements. And there were at least 2 individuals whose names appeared in leaked files from a 2023 lobbying investigation in Brussels. None of these people were there in any official capacity. None of them were on the public record. The story didn't break because of some big investigative scoop or an anonymous whistleblower. It came to light through a routine ship registry update, that kind of standard maritime filing that almost nobody reads unless you're an industry specialist. The document placed the vessel at a specific marina on a particular date. A royal researcher then cross-referenced this filing with a photograph published by one of the guests. It was a background shot of a dinner on deck, posted briefly on a private Instagram account before the user deleted it, but someone had already saved the image. Within 48 hours, 2 British journalists and a German media outlet received the photo. The German organization had spent years tracking European lobbying networks, so they knew exactly what they were looking at. By the first week of August, reporters were quietly verifying the basic facts. By the middle of August, the Palace press office started getting phone calls it was completely unprepared to answer. This situation was uniquely damaging, not just because of the vacation itself, but because of when it took place. For the previous 18 months, William had been pushing a very specific plan inside the palace. He wanted tighter controls on the outside relationships that senior royals could maintain, stricter rules regarding gifts and hospitality from people with financial interests connected to the crown, and a clear internal order stating that the monarchy could not risk another access selling scandal like the ones that destroyed Prince Andrew. William had put these new expectations in writing. His team sent the updated rules to the households of all senior royals. This guidance was mandatory, not optional. Camilla's office received the document. She went on the trip anyway. Royal sources spoke to the Times in August and described the atmosphere inside Kensington Palace as one of controlled fury. And if you understand how William functions, that phrase is way more chilling than an open display of anger. William doesn't yell, he doesn't leak to the press, he doesn't grant interviews to explain his side of things, he removes people from his life, he removed his own brother from the royal institution. He removed Camilla's sister from the Duchy of Cornwall payroll without making a single public comment. He forced Prince Andrew out of Royal Lodge through a process so methodical and patient that by the time it concluded, Andrew had no options left. The people who know William best say the same thing about him every time. When he decides something is over, it's completely over. The formal announcement, if it ever comes, is just standard paperwork. So, by late August, the question inside palace circles wasn't whether William would take action, it was how he'd respond and how quickly. But there's another detail we need to look at before we get to his reaction. Who told him? William didn't find out about this from the news media. He learned about it before journalists even started making their initial phone calls. Someone in the small group who knew about the trip, whether a guest, a staff member, or someone connected to the yacht's owner, made sure the details went straight to Kensington Palace. In the world of royalty, that's not just a leak, that's a warning. It means that whatever happened on that boat, at least one witness believed it was wrong enough to alert the future king directly. William had a source deep inside the circle, and that completely changes how we look at everything that followed, because it proves the scandal didn't catch him by surprise. Someone deliberately handed him the information to prompt him to act, and he did. Now let's talk about the paper trail, because this is where Camilla's story really falls apart. The yacht Esperanza 3 is registered in Malta, carries a Maltese maritime license, and is owned through a holding company based in Luxembourg. This setup, an island registration combined with a continental holding company, is pretty common for luxury vessels, but it also makes financial transparency extremely difficult. And that's a major issue here, because nobody has clearly answered who actually paid for Camilla's time on board. When royals accept private travel hospitality from outside individuals, they're supposed to declare it. There's a specific system for this. Senior royals who receive gifts, travel, or lodging from private individuals above a certain value must report it through internal palace channels. These reports go into annual transparency records that senior household officials review. Camilla's July trip doesn't appear in any of these records. The holding company that owns Esperanza 3 is registered in Luxembourg as Verlaine Capital Partners. It has 3 listed directors. One of them is a British citizen who was named in a 2022 Parliamentary Committee report on foreign influence in UK property markets. The report didn't say he committed a crime, but it did state that his firm's lobbying activities regarding heritage land decisions deserved closer scrutiny. Heritage land decisions are exactly the areas where royal support holds genuine influence. The King's Foundation, which Charles spent decades building and which Camilla is publicly linked to, weighs in on these kinds of choices. It's not definitive proof of wrongdoing, but it's significant. That answer landed very poorly inside Kensington Palace. The phrase, private travel as a personal matter, works fine for a holiday that a royal pays for themselves with no outside financial links. It does not work when the travel is hosted by someone whose company has a clear financial connection to royal charities. At that point, it becomes a conflict of interest that the palace's own rules were created to prevent. William's office challenged Camilla's response within days. A source described this pushback as direct, meaning it wasn't softened by diplomatic language or sent through assistants. The message stated that calling this a private matter was unacceptable, and demanded a full account of the trip's financing be provided to the king's senior officials immediately. As of the time of this report, that information still hadn't been provided. And to make things more complicated, this wasn't the first time. 3 palace sources confirmed to 2 different publications that Camilla had previously accepted hospitality from the same yacht owner. It happened during a long weekend in the summer of 2023. That trip was also kept secret and left off the transparency records. One senior official noticed the earlier trip at the time. A quiet conversation took place, nothing formal was recorded, and the matter was dropped. William didn't know about it then, but he knows about it now. This changes everything. What first looked like a single mistake is actually part of a pattern. The pattern was flagged once and ignored, and the same yacht owner hosted Camilla again in 2025, 2 years later after making financial contributions to royal structures in the meantime. The key document for William's team wasn't the port list, it was the charity accounts that cross-referenced the £40,000 donation from Verlaine Capital Partners against the dates of both yacht trips. Then they checked it against the 2024 planning applications submitted by a branch of that same holding company for a heritage site in Somerset. The application was rejected, but it was reviewed by a group that included advisors appointed by the royals. Nobody is saying Camilla stepped in to influence the outcome, but the appearance of a close relationship with a businessman seeking decisions from bodies linked to her network is exactly what the palace promised to stop. By late August, William's team saw that this was no longer just a story about a yacht. It was a failure of palace governance, and that left everyone facing a question nobody inside the palace wanted to ask out loud. Did Charles know? The meeting that changed everything took place on a Tuesday during the first week of September 2025. It was held at Kensington Palace rather than Buckingham Palace, and that choice of location is highly significant. William choosing his own residence, instead of the king's home, sends a clear signal before the meeting even starts. 3 senior advisors attended. William's private secretary, his communications secretary, and 1 official from the king's household who had been ordered to attend rather than invited. Ordered is exactly the right word, and nobody in the room missed the importance of that distinction. William brought a physical folder filled with printed documents instead of using a digital screen. Inside were the charity financial statements, the port logs, the lobbying disclosures from 2022, and a single-page summary of the 2023 trip. The earlier journey that had been quietly noted and then hidden away by an official who should have passed the information up the chain of command. He placed the folder on the table and left it there. He didn't describe the contents or guide them through the pages. He simply said, "I need to know who saw this in 2023, and decided it didn't need to go further." The official from the king's household, a man with over 15 years of palace experience, couldn't provide a clear answer. He knew the earlier trip had been flagged, but he didn't know who had decided to keep it off the official record. That lack of clarity did not satisfy William, and he made his displeasure obvious. According to a source with direct knowledge of the meeting, what followed wasn't a shouting match. It was much quieter and more uncomfortable. William went through the paper trail step by step. The first trip, the financial donation, the property planning application. The second trip. He arranged them in chronological order and asked a simple question. At what point was my father informed? The answer was complicated. Charles had been told about the July trip, but only as a casual update, not as a formal disclosure. He knew about it the way a husband is told his wife is going on a holiday. The location, approximate dates, that she was traveling with friends. He hadn't been told who owned the yacht. He didn't know about the Luxembourg holding company, the lobbying history, or the donation. Whether he bothered to ask is a separate question, and it was one nobody in the room was willing to answer directly. William sat in silence for a moment before saying that the king didn't know because the system failed to protect the right things. Then he made 3 specific demands. First, a full written disclosure of both trips had to be given to the king's principal private secretary within 7 days. Second, a full review of Camilla's patronages was required to check for links to outside donors. Third, an immediate suspension of all contact between Camilla's household and the yacht owner. Camilla pushed back against this final demand through Charles. The king called William the next day, arguing that Camilla had no intent to deceive, and that a formal review would only leak to the media. William responded directly, noting that the story was already out and the palace could either manage the situation or be destroyed by it. Charles didn't agree right away, but he didn't tell William to stop either. By the end of the week, Camilla's office sent a partial disclosure which William's team immediately rejected as incomplete. This formal rejection of the Queen Consort's office by a future king has no modern precedent. A stalemate followed, with Camilla's office providing only the minimum required information. But the stalemate ended abruptly when a new piece of information emerged from inside the palace. One of the yacht guests had held an unlogged meeting in London with a member of Camilla's patronage advisory board just 6 weeks before the trip. There's a photograph from September 12, 2025, showing Charles arriving at a film premiere in London completely alone. Camilla was listed on the original program but was absent that night. The official reason given was a scheduling conflict with no further details. Royal correspondents noted the change and moved on, and most people didn't think much of it. Inside the palace, however, that absence wasn't a scheduling conflict. It was the first visible sign that something had shifted in how Camilla's public commitments were being managed and who was now involved in those decisions. Charles has been in cancer treatment since February 2024. He hasn't discussed the specifics publicly beyond a brief statement at the time of diagnosis. What's known from palace sources and medical correspondence is that his treatment schedule has required significant adjustments to his working pattern. Engagements have been reduced, overseas travel has been limited, and there are days when he's simply not well enough to be in meetings. That physical reality has quietly changed the balance of power inside the palace in ways no announcement has ever formally acknowledged. When the king isn't well enough to chair a discussion, someone else chairs it. When he can't review a document, someone else reviews it. Over the course of 2024 and into 2025, that someone with increasing regularity has been William. This isn't a coup or a forced transition. It's simply what happens in any institution when the person at the top is managing a serious illness and has a capable deputy ready and willing to absorb the workload. But it does mean that by the time the yacht story broke, Charles's ability to intervene on Camilla's behalf was already more limited than it had been 2 years earlier. Not because he lacked the title or authority, but because the day-to-day running of the institution had been shifting toward William for months. And everyone inside the palace knew it. The phone call Charles made to William after that first meeting, the one where he argued that the review risked becoming a bigger public story, was genuinely difficult. Charles doesn't find confrontation with his son easy. Their relationship has been carefully rebuilt over the years since the worst of the Diana-era fallout, and Charles has invested real effort in it. He also loves Camilla deeply. He spent 30 years being publicly criticized for that relationship, and he married her when doing so was still a genuine risk to the institution. His commitment to her is not in question. So, when William told him that the partial disclosure from Camilla's office was insufficient and that the review would proceed, Charles pushed back again. He reportedly told William that Camilla had given him her word, that there was nothing in the 2023 trip that needed further scrutiny. William told his father plainly that her word did not match the documentation. That exchange tells you
Everything about where the authority actually sits right now.
a son telling his father, the reigning king, that a personal assurance from the king's own wife is not sufficient, and the king not being in a position to end that conversation with a firm no. Charles asked for more time, and William gave him 72 hours. Those 72 hours were among the most strained the household has experienced. Charles spoke to Camilla. Camilla spoke to her own advisors, and her advisors spoke to palace lawyers. At some point, the question of what exactly happened at the 2023 meeting between the yacht guest and the patronage advisory board member was put directly to Camilla. Her answer was that she hadn't been present at that meeting and hadn't known it took place. That may be entirely true, but it created a new problem. If she didn't know it took place, it meant someone in her circle had arranged the meeting between one of her patronage advisors and a man who would later host her on a yacht without telling her. Either her own staff was managing her in ways she was unaware of, or the meeting wasn't considered significant enough to mention to her. Neither explanation made things simpler for Charles to defend. By the end of the 72 hours, Charles reached the position no husband wants to reach. He couldn't contradict William's factual case because the documents existed and the meeting had happened. He couldn't independently verify Camilla's account because the relevant staff member had provided only a partial explanation. And he couldn't tell William to drop the review without openly undermining the institutional reform agenda he had himself publicly endorsed. He called William on Thursday evening. The conversation was shorter than the first one. He told William to proceed with the review, asked that Camilla be treated with dignity throughout the process, and requested that nothing be made public without his prior knowledge. William agreed to the last two terms. The review was already proceeding before the call ended, which Charles couldn't bring himself to say out loud, but what every senior official understood by that point was that he had just stopped being able to protect her. The space where his protection used to operate had quietly closed around him while he was focused on staying well enough to keep working. Camilla had built her security inside this institution on Charles's ability to shield her. That shield had just developed a crack too wide to patch. So, what does removal actually look like? In royal terms, Camilla's autumn schedule, as originally drafted by her household in July 2025, included 14 solo engagements between October and December. These were patronage visits, charity dinners, the opening of a hospital in Cardiff, 2 literary events for her reading initiative, and a keynote speech at a women's leadership conference in Edinburgh. By the end of September, 6 of those engagements had been quietly reassigned. They weren't cancelled. They were given to a different royal for the same date and event. The organizations involved were told the change was due to scheduling pressures, and no further explanation was given. Nobody asked questions publicly because that's not how you maintain a good relationship with the palace. But royal correspondents and Camilla's own staff noticed immediately, this is how removal happens inside a royal institution. It doesn't come with a public statement or a dramatic scene. It comes through a diary where the list of engagements grows shorter, briefing documents stop arriving, and meetings happen without you. The machinery of royal life relies entirely on access to information, events, and decision-makers. When that access shrinks, your influence shrinks too. Staff members quickly realize their futures are no longer tied to your office, and the power shift is complete without a single word being spoken. William didn't need to issue a statement about Camilla. The staffing changes occurred in 2 phases. In early October, 2 senior members of Camilla's team, our deputy private secretary and a senior communications advisor, were told their roles were being restructured as part of a palace efficiency review. Both accepted alternative positions within the wider royal household, and neither was replaced. The second phase was quieter, involving the redeployment of 3 junior staff members by the end of October. Camilla's dedicated team dropped from 11 staff members at the start of 2025 to just 7% by November. At the same time, her access to information was restricted. Senior royals receive regular private briefing documents on foreign policy, domestic politics, and institutional matters. Camilla had received a broad selection of these since the coronation, but from October onward her distribution was narrowed. Foreign policy and unrelated institutional briefings stopped entirely. She was moved from being kept informed as a matter of course to a strict need-to-know basis. Kate's role in this transition has been unmistakable. She took over the Edinburgh Women's Leadership Conference and 2 of the charity dinners originally scheduled for Camilla. Kate's office confirmed her attendance within a week of these reassignments, which suggests her team knew the slots were opening before Camilla's team had even processed the change. This deliberate repositioning allowed Kate to step into spaces Camilla once occupied, ensuring continuity for the organizations involved. One final detail from late October highlights how complete this shift has been. William and Kate spent the weekend with Charles at Highgrove House, his private country home in Gloucestershire. Camilla remained at Clarence House in London. Palace sources described it simply as an informal family weekend. The fact that Charles, William, and Kate spent time together without Camilla was closely noted within the palace. Camilla still holds her title and appears at official events alongside Charles. On paper, she remains the queen consort. Yet her diary is thinner, her staff is smaller, her briefings are limited, and her engagements are being filled by someone else. You don't need a formal decree to alter someone's position. You simply change everything around them until they feel the difference. And she feels it. In November 2025, William gave a private speech to a group of senior civil servants involved in public sector management reform. The event was closed to the press, and no transcript was ever released, but 2 people who attended later described the meeting to journalists. What they reported wasn't the kind of careful, cautious language people usually expect from a future king trying to protect his image. William told the room plainly that institutions that protect individuals at the expense of their own integrity do not survive. He didn't point to anything specific. He didn't name anyone. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew exactly what had been happening inside the palace over the previous 3 months. To understand why his reform plan isn't just a theory, it helps to look at what William actually controls right now. The Duchy of Cornwall generates roughly £30 million every year and covers 135,000 acres across England, the Isles of Scilly, and major financial holdings. William has managed this massive estate since September 2022 when Charles became king. In less than 4 years, he has replaced outside contractors, restructured the management team, and cut arrangements that relied on personal trust rather than written agreements. That last point is crucial. Undocumented arrangements based on personal trust are exactly what happened on that yacht. William didn't develop his strict view on governance by accident. He built it over years of running a £1 billion estate, and he proved it worked there before applying it to Camilla. The Royal Foundation shows exactly how his mind functions. It has a chief executive, a board, published annual accounts, and clear goals. When a program fails to deliver, it's cut. One former advisor explained that William runs the organization like someone who has been burned by secrecy before and believes documentation is the only real protection. Everything is on the record and open to review. This isn't a personality quirk. It's a system built after watching his own family repeatedly damage themselves through informal, unrecorded arrangements. William has been very clear about the kind of monarchy he intends to build. He wants fewer working royals, tighter controls over who represents the crown, and zero tolerance for outside financial relationships that appear to be conflicts of interest. The yacht scandal simply gave him the justification and momentum to speed up these changes. The reduction in working royals is already happening. Andrew and Harry are gone. Extended family members who used to handle regional events have been quietly phased out. The public face of the monarchy is now essentially William, Kate, Charles, and Anne with reduced workloads. This smaller group is much easier to manage, meaning fewer risks, fewer informal relationships, and fewer secret trips. Kate's position in this new structure has changed significantly. She returned to full public duties in early 2025 after her cancer treatment, quickly taking on a heavy workload. Her office now handles major coordination tasks, and she attends strategy meetings that traditionally would not have included the Princess of Wales. One source described her as a co-strategist rather than just a supporting spouse. William trusts her judgment above all others, making her the second most powerful person in the institution. Against this backdrop, Camilla's reduced role isn't just a temporary punishment for the yacht trip. The monarchy William is building has a new center of gravity, and she is simply not part of it. The engagements shifted to Kate are not going back. The cuts to Camilla's staff will not be reversed. This leaves one major unanswered question that palace officials avoid. When Charles dies, Camilla will become the Queen Dowager. She'll keep her title and a residence, but major estates like Sandringham and Balmoral will pass to William. The institutional support she relies on exists because Charles is king. When that changes, her quality of life will depend entirely on William's generosity. Given everything that has happened, it's highly unlikely he'll offer much. Camilla still has her title. She still walks beside Charles at state occasions, but the diary is thinner, the staff is fewer, and the woman filling her spaces is Kate. 3 questions nobody inside the palace is answering right now. Did Camilla genuinely not understand the risk she was taking? Is William right to move this decisively, or is he building a monarchy so controlled that it has no room for human error? And when Charles is gone, will William extend the generosity Camilla will desperately need from a man whose mother she helped destroy?